knowledge is easy to him that understands. So what I want to do tonight is I want to give you an understanding of your liver, because when you have an understanding of your liver, you actually then have the knowledge on how to treat it. Everything that comes into your body comes first to the liver, and the liver basically determines where everything goes. And everything that comes out of your body comes out under the jurisdiction of the liver. And so I'm going to begin with showing you, which I already have touched on, is what happens with everything that comes into the liver. Now, any environmental poisons that come into the liver assesses it, and if it's really toxic, it wraps it up in fat and stores it. But if it can, it'll break it down to a water-soluble state and release it. What we also looked at in our last lecture is what happens with the food. All of this food breaks down to glucose in the gastrointestinal tract, and then it goes into the blood on the M1 straight to the liver. So here's our liver. And then the liver determines where it goes. The liver is the largest internal organ in the body. Your liver is the only organ that has the ability to regenerate, and you'll see why God made it that so as we go through this lecture. Your liver is called the project manager because everything that goes into the body goes first to the liver. It determines what happens. And so as I showed you in the last lecture, all of this food breaks down to glucose. The glucose goes into the blood and it goes straight to the liver. It's called the portal vein. I call it the M1, straight to the liver. And then the liver determines, first of all, it goes to the cell. So I'll take you through this once more. The glucose goes into the cell. It goes through a 20-step pathway, which gives us 2 units of energy. End result of the 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. Pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into the powerhouse, called the powerhouse because this 8-step pathway gives us 36 units of energy. And as I showed you, this is the oxygen pathway. Oxygen is what causes so much energy. This has no oxygen, so it's also called the anaerobic pathway. We also looked at how the excess glucose gets stored as glycogen, little bunches of grapes. We also looked at how the excess after that of glucose is stored as fat. Your muscle cell stores this glycogen, the quick release glucose store, and it can only be used by your muscle cell. But your liver can also store glycogen. And the glycogen that your liver stores, it can go all over the body, whereas the glycogen in your muscle cell can only be used by your muscle cell. There's a book called Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes. You might have heard of it. It's quite a famous book. And he shows that back in the 1850s, there was a man called William Banting who was putting on weight. And he went to a very famous doctor called Claude Bernard, a French doctor, and he took him off all starches. It was called starches then. We call it carbohydrates now. So what did he eat? He ate a lot of fibre, a lot of vegetables. He ate a lot of meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs. There was his protein. And meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs also has a lot of fat. That was the diet that he was given by Dr. Claude Bernard. The weight just fell off him. Can you see why? You see, when you're not giving your body this quick release glucose stores, your liver can convert protein and fat to glucose, and your liver can turn your fat stores into glucose. And as I said the other lecture, that's called gluconeogenesis, creating new glucose out of the fat stores. So William Banting was not hungry because he was getting lots of energy from that being broken down and these. The weight was just falling off him because his liver was breaking down his fat stores because he wasn't delivering the quick release glucose. He was never hungry because, as you'll see tomorrow night, these are the 3 food groups that keep the food in the stomach longer. Has he found the perfect diet? Never hungry, weight falling off, lots of energy. So William Banting wrote a paper on it, and it was called The Bant. And this paper, we'd say today it went viral, but it actually went everywhere. This is the 1850s. And it was said, if you were on a diet, people would say, "Are you doing the Bant?" Let's fast forward to the 80s. What diet does that sound like? Dr. Robert Atkins' diet? Do you know that his book was #1 on the New York Times best-selling list 4 years running? Nutritionists and doctors hated him. Ansel Keys, who came up with the fat and cholesterol cause heart disease, they hated him. But the fact was, the people loved him. Why? Because what are we interested in? Something that works. This worked. And Atkins' patients weren't dying of heart attacks. Atkins scratched his head because his patients, the cancer patients, were going into remission. Remember we looked at yesterday how fungus and cancer are closely related, and fungus loves high glucose. Now his patients were on a diet that released slow, low glucose, so the cancer cells couldn't survive. His patients with high cholesterol levels came back to normal. Did you hear that? What are they eating? Meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs? No wonder the nutritionists and the doctors hated him, because he proved them all wrong. And I would be a fool not to acknowledge what that diet did. Now, before you run out of the door, hear me out, because I'm a vegetarian. And what was Atkins? High meat diet. Do you know he had the science? And as Dr. Carl Benjamin said to me, he said, I used to be one of Atkins' patients, and if Atkins had read the China study, he said, I believe Atkins would have become a vegetarian. So we're looking at his science here, and his science was correct. His diabetics were coming off their medication. This is type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and my last lecture showed you why that is so. And that's why Atkins wrote his books. And he discovered that these 3 food groups are the 3 essential food groups. Do you know what essential means? Body cannot make it, you've got to put it in. Fibre is essential because your gastrointestinal tract, as you'll see tomorrow night, it needs to be swept every day. And the vegetables sweep that. Most people don't realise on the Atkins diet you had to eat 3 cups of vegetables a day. 1 cup had to be greens. Protein's essential because 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is protein, and 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is fat. That's pretty essential, except for the brain cell. Those cells are 70% fat, the membrane around them. The fattiest organ in the body is the brain. Wow, the 3 essential food groups. How many Aussies on the high carbohydrate diet are missing out on the 3 essentials? Now, carbohydrates aren't bad. What a relief. We like them. My husband would never forgive me if the potatoes stopped. Carbohydrates are only bad if you overdo them and they're refined. Can you see that? That's where the problem arises. What Atkins found was that the non-essential food group is actually carbohydrates. Do you know what that means? You can live well without them, but let me very quickly say, I don't suggest you do. There is no need. You see, your carbohydrate part of the meal is your negotiating part of the meal, and the negotiations change depending on your weight, your size, your height. My 6'6" brother-in-law eats more carbs than I do. But probably where the negotiations change the most is your health status. So if someone wanted to quickly conquer diabetes, as I just showed you, what would they drastically drop? Carbs. Someone wanted to lose weight quickly, what would they drastically drop? Carbs. Someone wanted to conquer cancer, what would they drastically drop? Carbs. And because it's a non-essential, You can actually live without it.